Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. All right, folks. So welcome to another episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. And I'm honored to have John Dunlosky and Regan Gurung. So thank you guys for being here. It's such a pleasure.
Great to be here.
Great to be here. And you said my name right without even me telling you how. So
really? Okay.
Even better. That is right on.
I think I probably, that's the thing. I probably watched another podcast or something, and I heard someone pronounce your name, Regan. So I'm glad I got it right.
Right on.
See, that's prior knowledge, right? Yeah. How important it is.
Way to weave it in.
Awesome. And let me ask you guys, I think the most important question, because we've been talking about science for a very long time. Everyone wants to know more about science, but I think science hasn't made its way, let's say, into education as much as we would like, So how important is science for education, for teaching and learning? So who wants to get started? Yeah.
I'll jump in first. First, science is absolutely essential for all aspects of life. And I mean, as you know, it provides answers to questions that we have, right? It sheds light on the unknown, on the quest for a truth and its consequences. The difficulty is that for education and for learning, everyone has their own intuitions about how things work, right? And often these intuitions are correct. So if I have a question like, well, what's the best way for me to learn content? I might think, well, the best way is how it feels easiest and what fits my own learning style, right? Which makes a lot of sense and it's intuitive. It just turns out when scientists ask questions like, what's the best way to learn something? They use a whole host of methods that provide, say, partial answers to that question. Not capital T truth, but capital T, we're getting close to the truth. And why I say it sheds light onto the unknown and provides the truth and its consequences. I think in education, we're often interested in the consequences of science. That is, what are the implications of our discoveries for how to build a better learner? And even though science doesn't provide any fail-safe recommendations, in my mind, through really excellent work of scientists, it provides the best current recommendations for how to go. It may not always be correct in the long run, but I trust science and all the efforts that go into using that methodology more than I do on anyone's intuition, including my own, because I have the same intuitions about learning as other folks do. And my initial intuitions were at least incorrect as far as science is concerned, and quite frankly, incorrect as far as just learning well. So I think science is absolutely essential. And where I think people have a negative view of it is because sometimes they feel like it should always provide the best answers to everything. And it's fallible like any other methodology or process, but it's the best thing we have, I think, to getting at what works best for different people. I don't know. What do you think, Regan? Is that?
I was actually, going to start with saying that I do think science is in education a lot, and it's there. So I am guessing that a lot of your listeners and the listeners right now may go, "What are you talking about? Of course, science is in education." Yeah. And that's why, I would say it's there. I think the problem is that our students in the classes don't listen to the science enough, right? And I think John's point about the intuition, students believe there are certain ways, right? How do I study? I just read and read and read, and I reread and I reread. And that is one of the first biggest myths out there, in that rereading is not the best way to do it. So I think the issue is there is good science, but we as scientists often have a problem in sharing science, which is honestly why John and I got together and wrote this book to make science more accessible. So Study Like a Champ doesn't read like a textbook, or at least we don't think so, right? And to be fair, many hundreds and thousands of high school teachers, college teachers, students write to both of us and say, here's a book that we actually want to read.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is all of us scientists making science more palatable and accessible to the average person who may not have a PhD in, in any form of science, or may not even have gone through all the work that it takes to be a teacher. I mean, our teachers work very hard, right? High school teachers in particular, hats off to the certification and the training, right? But those students in the class need to be open to science a lot more.
Most definitely. And you guys are doing a great job. I ordered your book. It's not here, but I actually interviewed Henry Roediger, and we talked about Make It Stick. I also talked to Dan Willingham. I know you wrote a paper with him, John, right? Very important paper. I have his book here, Outsmarting Your Brain, and a bunch of books on retrieval practice. And I wanted to ask you guys, because I think some teachers feel like science will dictate or just tell them what to do in the classroom, and for some reason they feel like, well, that will not be helpful at all, because I need to be free to make my own choices, methodological choices. What would you say to teachers who feel that they are going to lose some power by listening to scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists? What's your message?
I think my message would be, congrats for doing the right thing and going with your own methodology and so forth. And please embrace science and what we have to say, because what you're going to do is find yourself being more powerful in the classroom, finding ways to do things more effectively, more efficiently. So you're still doing your own thing. And for teachers, I hope their own thing is like trying to help the students acquire whatever specific knowledge they need to get to pass their standards. What we're trying to do is tell teachers how they can do that most effectively, right? The kind of techniques they can use. So we're not asking teachers to develop a whole new philosophy or perspective on teaching, but potentially take advantage, right, of some of the things that we're learning about how to teach well or how to study well in the context of their lesson planning. So if anything, I think teachers who embrace some of these new advances, and many of them are very straightforward, have to do some lesson changes, some different lesson planning, but they're finding, at least in the long run, that the outcomes are going to be a lot better. I think it provides power, but I do understand something that Regan mentioned. We have teachers who are very overburdened, very sharp individuals, and asking them to learn anything or do anything new, quite frankly, is a big ask, right? So I understand there's this tension, right, between trying something new and really wanting to see it work versus just sticking to what you've been doing. And I'm going to say it's, I think someone's recently wrote a book on basically teaching like a champ and how to use the best practices there. And I'd highly recommend read those kind of books that are highly accessible, that tell you how to translate the outcomes from science in relatively practical ways to help you and your students. Let me just add one note to that, because you mentioned two people in two books I really, truly love just recently. And I highly recommend to any readers, if you haven't read these books, buy them. But ours is very different. Okay.
Yeah.
Ours is a practical approach to helping people and students learn better. So beyond just giving you anecdotes about what works best, and then having students figure out how to use that content, like Make It Stick, which is a great book, right? Yeah. We tell students how to translate that information into their day-to-day activities. And I'm assuming, I still have not read Teach Like a Champ, but I'm assuming Regan's telling teachers how to take the science and make small changes to their teaching, right, that you can use in a very practical way. So you don't have to think about, again, the consequences of science, which sometimes it's not obvious, right, how to take an outcome of science and apply it. I don't know. What do you think?
It's hard to translate, right, what comes out of the, educational psychology, cognitive psychology into actual teaching practice, right? Real stuff you're doing in the classroom, right? Yeah.
And there's something even more. And there's something even more than that, which is what I loved about your question, Andre. And that is, most teachers have a way of doing things.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for a long time. If they are a brand new teacher, they will do it a way that they've seen it being done. So your question about what do you say to teachers is so important, because especially when they're overburdened, especially when they have a little bit of time, there's no time to learn new stuff. And you've got to convince them why not do this stuff the way they've been doing it for years, or that they think they should be doing it. And I get that question from teachers so often, but I also get a similar question from students, because like John said, our book is written for students, and students also have a way of doing things that they've always been doing, right? How do you tell them? So your question applies to both teachers and students, and here's my answer. I say this to students, I say this to teachers. I say, it's not my way or your way, it's the way that science says it works.
Exactly.
And that takes away all the argument. It's not my ego. It's not I say, it's not we've been doing this for 30 years. I'm going to tell you how to do it. No, it's not my way. It's what the evidence suggests.
That's perfect.
That's the key.
But here's the thing. Yeah, John, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's still difficult, though, because if you took one of my courses 30 years ago, you were in for a world of hurt, because to say I was not a good teacher is an understatement. And as I started to learn more about best practices, I had a couple of insights that scared me a great deal. That is, for me to really take advantage of all this cool stuff on my way toward becoming a better teacher, or at least I hoped, I realized I was going to have to change a lot in the classroom. And that was scary. So I understand teachers or students not wanting to make that initial switch to doing things a different way. And for me, part of the scariness was, I think I have to teach less in order for students to learn more.
Yeah.
To use these techniques now, I have to pull back and give the students the less of me, quite frankly, less content that I felt was critical, and give them just the content I knew they could use these kinds of strategies that are good for them to really excel. So by no means is this change easy to do for all of you teachers and students who have been using a particular techniques that you like. And the way to change, and the reason to change, dear students, if you're running into hurdles and you're feeling frustrated and you're thinking, wow, I'm just not that smart, stop thinking that way. Read our book, Study Like a Champ, and use different techniques to help you get over those humps, because learning is frustrating. It's always difficult. And the way to really excel is, like Regan said, use those techniques that science has said can really elevate your learning and make you successful. Because sometimes those practices we've been using all these years have led to some success.
Yeah.
But once you hit that first hurdle, like often students do when they get to college, they start tripping up. And that's when studying like a champ is critical. Actually, I should put this.
Yeah, perfect. And we will talk about the book, but I just wanted to ask something before we go there. You mentioned that learning is difficult. I had the pleasure of talking to Bob and Liz Bjork, Desirable Difficulties. They're amazing. And here's the thing. I think a lot of the listeners will be asking something like, okay, how do you know that the science actually has something valuable to offer? How do you get to those conclusions after you design an experiment, for example? How do you know that this is going to help students or not help students? And to give you just a little bit more context, one thing Robert Bjork said, it's almost sinister that to think that the things we normally do to study are not going to help us in the long run, that they're going to help us for, short term results. If you take a test at the end of the day, you're going to ace the test, but then 1 week after, you can't even remember the stuff that you studied, right? So how do you know that the science is actually giving you valuable insights?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, especially in this day and age, if that wasn't always the case, trust is hard to come by, right?
Yes.
Right? How do you trust? How do you know what to believe? There's less fact checking. People say a lot of stuff in social media. How do you know it's true? And ironically, and I say this to my students very often, I say, ironically, people seem to be more inclined to believe some meme or TikTok than they are to believe science, right? Of course, that's just a commentary on the state of affairs, right? Memes, TikToks, people are, in quotes, learning what to do from them. But that question you asked about that is all about critical thinking, and it's all about how do we know it works. And this is why the good news is that science has a method, right? The scientific method. And I think science has a method that compares different techniques. And that's what I love about you. You know, you already alluded to John's paper with Willingham and colleagues. That 2013 Dunlosky et al. It compares the utility of different techniques. And it talks about how it's compared and what the methodology is. And I will tell you, all of that is good. And you may say, oh, but papers like that students don't get. I'll tell you what students get. Every class, and I teach introductory psychology. In the fall, my class is often 400 students, right? And I'll tell you what I do. I will often show data in class. I'll say, here are the students who use this study technique. Here are the students who use the optimal study technique. Here are the grade differences. There's nothing like showing them actual data, because then they go, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I do that thing where the grades are lower. I'm going to be more likely to do this, right? One of the big things we talk about is retrieval practice.
Perfect.
I practice what we preach. I start every class with retrieval practice, every class. And I will tell you, by the time we are at week 3, students are saying, can we do more retrieval practice? Because I can see, I can feel, I can see the difference that it's making. So I think that whole question about how can we trust the science is we've got to be transparent with the data. There are too many teachers that I talk to who go, oh, that's too much jargon for students. And I go, trust your students, show them some data. All right. And you will be amazed because evidence, right? I mean,
exactly.
We change behavior when we see evidence. For a lot of those memes and those TikToks, there's no evidence. But studies that John and I have both done, there's data in there that says, do it this way and you're going to do it better. And that convinces a lot of students.
And you know, just because you mentioned John's paper with Dan Willingham, you know, this is a big one. I studied as an educational psychology student at the University of Bristol, you know, with Paul Howard Jones, and so it was a big one. And can you tell us a little bit about that paper, John? And then we can talk about the book, because I remember it's a little shocking the first time you read it, because all the stuff you thought worked really well doesn't work really well, apparently, right? Rereading, summarizing, highlighting, low utility, right? And then
very low.
So what works well and why? Can you tell us a little bit about what you found out in that paper?
Sure. And let me start with what doesn't work so well and why. And then say, in fact, don't stop using these things. So take something like summarizing and highlighting. Okay. Research, lots of research suggests that using those techniques like highlighting a chapter doesn't help you learn it any better than just reading that chapter. Now, there's some exceptions to that rule and so forth, but that's okay. Now, that doesn't seem that surprising, that just highlighting something, although you could think maybe you have more attention there. So when I tell students, don't throw away your highlighter, though, because highlighting is the start of the journey, right? You highlight what you think you need to know, you're identifying it, summarizing the same thing, you're trying to summarize what you need to learn, but then you have to use other techniques to learn them, right? So when we wrote this paper, we wanted to investigate the utility of underlining and rereading and summarizing because we knew students use that a lot. Okay? We also evaluated the effectiveness of a variety of other strategies, not necessarily because students use them, but we thought maybe they were effective and we should look at the literature on it. As important for anyone who's interested in reading this article, everything that we surveyed was something that could be used for free. So there are many automated technologies out that are based on these principles that we're sure would work well in certain contexts, but some students can't afford that stuff. So we were just focused on these things. And quite frankly, we surveyed, and by we, this was a large group of folks doing this paper. I think over the years I've gotten way too much credit for accidentally being the first author. And it just some obvious things bubbled up. Okay, like space practice as a really effective technique. And space practice isn't really a technique, it's more of a schedule. When are you going to do things? Spread across time, right? Do the same thing over and over again, or study the same content over and over again across time is much better than spending the same amount of time studying that content all massed in one. Okay. Now you combine that learning schedule with an effective technique like retrieval practice. Again, 100 years of research shows that retrieving something from memory is more effective in the long run than just simply rereading it, assuming you can retrieve it. That's a qualifier that's critical there. So those two are really effective together, right? And again, for us, when we wrote the paper, I felt like maybe most folks knew that. And what I didn't realize at the time, kind of most folks in the education sciences knew that some of these things worked well, but somehow how that paper was written resonated with folks. And I think it was the science, the clarity, and the lack of statistics. So we didn't do any kind of highfalutin meta-analysis, which to some people's chagrin. But we just, did our best survey of the literature. And I think it's still, to this day, given all the new evidence over the past, well, that's over a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
Still is confirming many of our initial recommendations. The only one that I would take back is that I think we gave interleaved practice a kind of a medium rating, and I would jack that up now based on all the new evidence, especially for mathematics and so forth. So, it took us 3 years to do it. It was a great project, and fingers crossed, I hope it's having a positive impact. I really do think
most definitely
relatively technical reports like that, and that was a technical report. Thank goodness for one Henry Roediger for telling us to shorten it greatly. He was our editor, and he said,
"Oh, really?
Too much theory." Oh, yeah, too much theory. Yeah. We had a whole section that took me almost 6 months to write. That he said, "You got to get rid of it." And it's like, what? This is awesome.
I know that feeling. I think Paul Howard Jones did the same thing to me when
you got to get rid of it. Things like Study Like a Champ. Yeah. And I don't mean to pat Regan on his back, but I want to. I think he's just done a great job of taking those relatively technical, not as accessible as one might like, papers like the 23, and turn them in a way that's more practicable, more usable.
Yeah.
And that's what excites me. I think we're with things like Make It Stick, the work that Willingham is doing and so forth, we're starting to make these slow inroads to getting the attention of educators and to showing them what you can do with a little bit of science-based techniques in the classroom. And I'm excited. It's a slow-moving barge, but then translation of science to any kind of application that is not going to make billions of dollars is slow, right? And it's going to be slow, but I like the direction it's moving, partly for folks like you, Andre, doing these great podcasts, trying to get the good word. So
great. Yeah. And I want to ask you, Regan, to start talking about Study Like a Champ then, because, okay, so I know that I talked to Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa a couple of weeks ago, and she was, mind-brain education, neuromeds, right?
Yep.
And I know you guys addressed that as well. So there are certain things that teachers and students are using that are based on some, faulty, definition or distorted idea. So that's an edumyth or a neuromyth, right?
Right.
So what does work, and what should we be using more often in class, as students trying to get better grades, but also learn, and also as teachers, so that we can help our students learn more effectively?
Yeah, and I want to actually start off by underscoring something that John said, because it's also the theme in the book, and that is, and this is so key for any especially any teacher listening, but also for the students, and that is, you should be saying less of this, of certain things, but not necessarily none of it. And I think the problem we've had for the longest time, so you mentioned summarizing and highlighting, those low utility things. Honestly, I think the problem is we started off some years ago by saying, no, don't do this. And that goes so against people's natural inclinations and what they've been doing that it's difficult. And I think they start tuning you off because it's like, why are you telling me not to do what I've been doing all the time? And I seem to have some success with. So my mantra right now is say less to summarizing and highlighting, and say yes to retrieval practice, spacing, and interleaving. And it's that simple thing that I have my students hook themselves around is say yes to this, say less to that.
Perfect.
And that say yes, say less is such a nice, simple way to go. And I think it and the key here, and you alluded to this right when we started, was the prior knowledge. We've got to make that link to prior knowledge. If we just say, oh, you fool, all those things you've been doing, don't do it, that's not starting off on the right foot, right? Yeah. And so the say less, say
that's how you get them to rebel against you, right? Because
exactly.
Exactly.
So I have to say that because I think that's the message in the Dunlosky et al. 2013 paper. And that is something we really unpack in Study Like a Champ. And to now truly answer your question, we were so aware and are so aware that these myths exist that chapter 1 is all about the myths. Right. So I think I love the Neuromyth book that you alluded to, read that, though, there are some great books on the myths out there, but I think it's so important to start by facing some of the issues that, or the existences that students have. So you said, what would you say? I'd say examine your assumptions about what works. Yeah. Students, teachers, examine your assumptions. That's why chapter 1 is all about the assumptions. Some highlights that a teacher's teaching style has to match a learning style, right? Yeah. The fact that, and John already said this 15 minutes ago, that learning is easy. Learning's not easy. Learning is challenging. Learning is challenging. And I say that day 1 of my class. We say that in chapter 1. Learning is challenging.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I didn't pay this gentleman to say that, folks, okay? Learning is not easy. Because here's the thing. Let me just give you some context. Here in Brazil, probably in the US as well, there's this narrative that we have to make learning easy for everyone, right? Especially for kids, struggling kids and things like that. It's not that, right? And we're not supposed to do that because that's going to happen. I think that's detrimental to effective learning, right? Because of the idea of desirable difficulties and everything, right? Yeah.
And you know what? What makes matters worse? And this is truly a global phenomena, is there are so many teachers, especially junior teachers, especially first-time teachers, who worry that if they challenge students, they'll get bad evaluations. Yeah. And if they get bad evaluations, they won't get promoted or tenure or merit. And let me say, that is a very real issue, right? I'm not saying, oh, no matter what, do it. Yeah, John and I, are both full professors. You may say, oh, you full professors, you can say that. But I think it's finding that right way to let our students know that challenge is part of the deal. So I'm very upfront with my students. I say this class is going to be challenging, but in the same breath, and I do have large breaths, in the same breath, I say, and I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. Something else that we say in chapter 1 is, and I love this. This is a great exercise that I do, again, first week of class. I tell students, and this also goes back to your question about why should we trust science, right? Yeah. Here's a good reason to trust science. Well, I asked students, I said, learning, what do you think, what factors do you think will predict whether you learn or not? All right. And they come up with various stuff. And I say, all right, let's make it easy. If you have 100%, what percent of that 100% of your learning do you think is due to me as the teacher versus you as the student? And very often students will say, hey, I'm going to college or I'm going to high school. It's all you. You're the teacher. You've been trained. Maybe 80% is you and some of it is me. And then we show them the data based on, there's a really large meta-analyses, right? This big statistical summary of papers that right now, and there's a new version that was just released recently, the sample size is something like 350 million right?
Oh, wow.
Because
Yeah.
it's meta
Yeah.
analysis, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge. This is John Hattie at the University of Melbourne,
Yeah.
and he just released the newest version of his visible learning data. But what he did was he carved it up and he showed that 50% of the variance in learning is due to what the student does.
Yeah.
And that makes for such a great conversation with our students because they go, "Oh, wait, you mean I've got to put some effort in?" Yes, yes. And I say, don't get me wrong, we are not sitting back on our behinds. We are putting effort. We are throwing our shoulder behind this as well, but it's together. So that's the big first answer. Yes, there's what John already did in the paper, retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving. But I think what's missing in these conversations is the being real and saying learning is challenging. You've got to put in effort. I will put in effort and help you. And the one other thing I'll add that's a non-cognitive kind of thing, and we dedicated a whole chapter to this, is the importance of all those things that I think too many of us don't say enough about. Sleep,
Oh, yeah.
physical fitness, mindfulness, mental health, right? That's
Yeah.
a
So
huge issue,
important.
right?
Yeah.
And I think we address that head on. And I don't think we as educators have done enough of that in the past. So
Yeah.
those are some big level things.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Regan. I used to tell my students that it's kind of like hiring a personal trainer, a coach, and going to the gym and not doing the workout. So it doesn't
Yeah.
work like that, right? So if you expect your teacher to actually shove things into your brain and you don't have to do anything, it doesn't work like that. And you guys mentioned that the two most important or most effective strategies are retrieving and spacing, right? And I think because that adds that challenge of really testing if I know something, if I can, if I can find that information in my brain and actually use it. So can you talk a little bit about that? How do you add retrieval practice to your teaching, for example? So what can you do to help your students retrieve more often?
So one thing I do when I was teaching
Yeah.
regularly, and this is something that I incorporated about 10 years ago when I was learning about this literature, and I think Regan alluded to this as well, that he does, is start every class with a mini retrieval practice. Now,
Yeah.
for me, in the classes that I taught, I would always have that mini practice look like the eventual exam. So with the idea, and I would tell them this explicitly, we're doing exam practice with the hopes that after every day of this for like 4 weeks, they start to becoming less anxious because they know now they keep practicing exam questions, right? What I'll do though is start taking the most important content and having them basically do retrieval practice on that or ask them questions as a warm-up. I call them warm-up quizzes that you get credit for. I have everyone do this on paper. They hand in their answers. They get credit if they just show up and write their name on the paper. So it's not high stakes.
Yeah.
It's just engage. So what I'll do is over the 2 or 3 weeks, I'll come back to some questions. And now something that everyone missed originally, now they're quickly getting. So they get this experience like, well, I practiced it 2 weeks ago and now I get it again. And I've got it down. One other way I use this, and I hope teachers embrace this, and Regan will probably talk about this as well. Of course, I'm using this retrieval practice as a way to evaluate the quality of my prior teaching.
Yeah.
Because I thought I did a great job explaining this one point. I'm telling students, please put this in your notes. I always telegraph when I want them something to be there. And then the next week, I asked them a question about that with alternatives, and no one gets it right. That's important for me to know. It's feedback that somehow I'm not getting them. Sometimes I might not have taught something appropriately or didn't, so I have to rephrase it. So it's actually good feedback for me as a teacher as well. Throughout all of this process of these daily quizzes, takes 5 minutes a class. I don't spend that much time. I again use that as a way to tell students about the evidence, like Regan does. Hey, this is why I'm doing this. I'm not just trying to punish you at the beginning of each class. What I'm doing is using a technique that's really focused on helping you to learn the content. So that's one way I use retrieval practice in my class. And then I, of course, have a variety of ways I teach the students to use it on their own too. But maybe Regan has other creative ways that he does this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add two very, very pragmatic ways. But what I also want to start with, though, Andre, is I think convincing students to put the effort into doing this, right?
Yeah.
I think, for too many years, I would just get up in front of the class and say, this is what science says. And then I'd assume that, hey, I've told them what science says works, that they're going to do it. Well, you got to motivate them to do it, right?
Yeah.
And there are two things I want to talk about. There's motivating them to do it, and then there's not forgetting the fact that we, as the instructor, we are designing the course.
Yeah.
We can design the course to do retrieval practice and spacing, right? So from the motivational standpoint, I mean, and you sort of almost said this, Andre, which is what reminded me of this, is I mean, to motivate my students, I start with a very, very basic challenge. And I say, look, here's the deal. We've got these really cool brains, right? Anywhere from 86 billion to 126 billion neurons, depending on which neuroscientist you ask, right? So it's a cool brain, it's great structure. But as far as our memory models go, we've got sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. And I said, here's your challenge, people. The challenge is to get stuff from working memory into long-term memory, right? And if you succeed at this challenge, not only will you remember it for your exam and for life, right? But you'll be able to draw it. And that's important too. It's not just get it in there, it's get it back out. And this is such simple language, right? But that's so important. That's the challenge. Get it in there and to get it back out when we need it. And that's why retrieval practice and spacing helps, right? Very simplified, but that's the key. So the two pragmatic things that I do, I mean, mine is even simpler than John's. Every class, I ask them 4 questions, 4 to 5, 3 to 5 questions, and they have to write something down or type something, and they can either type or write it out. And I say to them, even if they write down, I don't know, they've got to actively be writing down something. Okay. And I think one of the big things about retrieval practice is it's that process of effort of trying to recall that then strengthens it later, right? That's the key. So everybody has to write down something, even if it is, I don't know. Okay. And slowly with time, they're trying harder and they're writing something down. So that's really, really simple. There's no clickers. There's no technology. There's nothing. There's no prep. I mean, to be quite honest, sometimes I'll remember something on the spur and go, hey, how about this? Right? So I do that frequently. The next thing does take a little bit of prep, but it's very little. And that is the recognition that I am the instructor. I have control over the course design. So I design my course to give them retrieval practice and spacing. How do I do that? Quite simply, quizzes, but quizzes with multiple attempts. And here's the key.
Yeah.
The multiple attempts, I set it using the course management system that they have to space the multiple attempts.
Ah, okay.
You see, so versus saying you can take this as many times and I'll count your highest score, which I do say, in addition, you cannot take your multiple attempts unless you've spaced it. And I set that up by the settings in the learning management system. And any learning management system that does that. So what that gets around is, in the past, I would just tell them, here's the data on why spacing is good. Well, as some of John's work with, I think Rachel Blaserman was a great study that I'm thinking about. Students have great intention to do it, but they don't actually do it. So even if they intend to space, they're not actually doing it. So I solve that by designing the course where they have to space. And I think those are the kind of pragmatic things that we can do as teachers that will make students walk the walk that we're talking.
That's so perfect. You know, and it's so important you mentioned that, because we control the learning management system, right? So we can add those, retrieval practices that, that students will have access to. And that brings me to a question that I started asking some of my guests, because I think it's very controversial. So how do you guys feel about AI and ChatGPT? And because we're talking about, okay, you have to make an effort, a cognitive effort. It has to be a little difficult, right? But what about cognitive offloading and just, typing a prompt into ChatGPT and getting a whole essay out of it, that's very bad for learning. Am I right to assume that? Yeah.
So let me. I get pretty fired up about the whole AI stuff. So I love the AI question.
Yeah.
I think too many educators are looking at it primarily as a cheating device. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're getting a little better of that. But here's what I'd like to say: AI has affordances, right? AI has affordances, and it's how we use it. Okay. So my take on it is addressing upfront how AI, what the role AI plays in the class. I give my students a very simple acronym. I say, you need to get a feel for your AI use. And here's what FEAL. F is faster. Is it really going to be faster if you do it? Okay. The E is ethical. Is it ethical? All right.
Great.
Because in my class, it's okay to use it given my parameters and guardrails.
But don't plagiarize, right?
Right. Right. What is ethical use and what's not? So is it faster? Is it ethical? The classic question, is it accurate?
Yeah.
Is it accurate? And here, Andre, is probably the key answer. The L in my get a feel is ask yourself, will you be learning?
Yeah.
What's it doing to your learning if you use it? Let's be real about it. Let's be real about it. Because some students may say, I don't give a darn about whether I learn or not. Well, let's be upfront about that. If that's the case, that's good to know. But once students go, oh, wait a minute, I could do this, but then I don't know how to do the task, right? And now here's where there's that dance between instructor and student. Yes, we do have to rethink assessments and assignments. We do. Yeah. Because this is a world where people will have AI at their disposal. And I think we have a responsibility as educators to prepare our students for working in a world where there is AI, right?
Yeah.
But the question is not just to plug and play, to think critically about it. So there are many, both the F and the L, faster and the learning. There are many things where I've tried using AI, but it takes me longer because of all the cleanup I have to do.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't use it in those cases. There are also some things, both accuracy and whether I am learning or not. And I mean, John and all of us, I'm sure, read and write a lot. There are a lot of cases where it's not accurate. And by using it, we're not learning. If we're getting AI to summarize something, one of the things about science is the nuance in design, how it varies. And if you just ask for an AI summary, you're going to lose out on your own self learning. Now, yes, that's not a big deal for everybody. But if we have these conversations up front with our students, with ourselves to start, but with our students too. With our students. But I think having that conversation about AI is so important. And you will find, because I have found this in this last year, I mean, my lab does work on AI. We have studies that look at how is learning changed based on AI use. And I can tell you, having these conversations in the class, I can see that the way students are using AI in my classes is changing because of the conversations we're having. And just like something else I saw a long time ago, I am trusting students to be able to be mature enough to have the conversation because they are. And I think too often we don't give them that.
That's so true.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to Regan's wonderful exposition about AI there, except to point out the obvious. Faculty are using AI.
Yeah.
If faculty are using AI to help them do their job, students should be allowed to use AI to help them do their job. Now we have to have the bigger conversation about what's their job, what should they be responsible for. And right now, I don't want to name any university names, but a lot of universities are struggling how to navigate this. I think they should listen to Regan at this point about what to do because it's hard for me as a faculty to yell at students for using this in some ways that seem to be ethical and faster when I, as a teacher, am using it in some ways. Now, if all that's happening is the students are writing their papers using ChatGPT and I'm grading their papers using ChatGPT, then maybe we could decide to all do something else together. But it's going to take a while to navigate. I mean, this technology has come on very quickly, I think, compared to other things in the past couple decades. And I think everyone's trying to figure it out. And quite frankly, I just learned something from Regan. That was great, Regan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I usually tell my students they can use ChatGPT to, I don't know, maybe prepare quizzes, based on the material we studied or something like that. Because that's a way, I think it's a clever way for you to use it. Because, you can copy and paste and then, create a quiz, a multiple choice quiz, and then you can use it as a retrieval practice assistant or something like that. Then I think it works well, right? But there's no guarantee that they're using it like that. So that's why it's a very complicated question, right? Yeah.
But I think, that's exactly it. When we start talking to students about this, it's all, and both for us as teachers, us as researchers, us as human beings, when in dealing with AI, it's all about prompting wisely. That's what I tell, I say, you've got to prompt it wisely because you can, we've talked about retrieval practice. AI is great for retrieval practice, but you've got to set it up.
Yeah.
Because the default is AI wants to please you, right? The default is to give you the answers. And you've got to say, here's one of my favorite prompts. One of my favorite prompts is something along the lines of, here's a draft of a paper and here's the assignment. Point out issues, but do not correct it. That's a prompt.
Okay.
And you prompt it and it says, notice you didn't hit the second bullet point, or, you could do better with this, but it doesn't correct it for you. Now, if you don't give it that prompt, it will correct it for you.
Yeah.
In fact, it'll even say, would you like me to revise this for you to be in line with the assignment? Yeah. And you say, no.
Exactly.
We've got the control. Don't give up the control, people.
That's so true.
So it's all prompt wisely.
Yeah. And that brings me, we're approaching the end. I could talk to you guys all day, but that brings me to a question that has a lot to do with what is it out there? What do you guys want to know more about? What is interesting, or what's coming up in your field in educational psychology or cognitive psychology that we're still struggling to understand? Is there any particular topic that you're interested in, or something you might be studying at the moment? I know you are retired, right, John? So I'll ask Regan, what is interesting out there?
Yeah, so I have a direct answer to that question, and then I have a bigger picture for all of us listening and here to think about. And the direct answer is I'm moving my attention a lot to effort. What predicts effort? Yeah. What predicts whether a student will go to class? And I mean literally go to class. In my day,
yeah.
When I was an undergrad, going to class was not a question I asked myself. Yeah. I went to class. Yeah. That is not a question many students ask themselves, but it is definitely a question many of my students do ask themselves. So I would love to better understand in this day and age, what's predicting effort, whether it's going to class, whether it's working on an assignment, because whether it's Study Like a Champ or the wonderful, 2013 paper, we know a lot of the cognitive things that help, but I don't think even with these, it's all well and good to say retrieval practice and spacing. But like I said, learning is challenging and you've got to put in the effort. So what's predicting the effort, right? Some of the key players, some of the things that a lot of schools are looking at and researchers are looking at is things like belonging, right? Does belonging at a university make a difference? Does it influence persistence? And that's exactly what my lab has been working on, which is how does belonging and persistence, whether belonging to a class or belonging to a university, how will that influence effort? Because especially as an instructor, clearly, we know one answer to the question of should I go to class is the class engaging or not? And if the answer is no, it's pretty easy that I don't want to go. But beyond just saying, hey, teachers, be engaging, it doesn't mean we've got to put on a dog and pony show just to get our students to come. So understanding effort is my most direct, what I'm focusing on. It leads to a bigger level thing for all of us to think about. We have had two major events in the last 5 years that force us to look at higher education in general.
Yeah.
That's COVID, the pandemic,
Definitely,
and then AI. Both the pandemic and AI has changed people's expectations of what it means to learn, have changed people's expectations of what colleges and also to a large extent high school, right? But especially college. There are so many students whose expectations of how much they should be reading, of what they need to work, is so skewed by the fact that they went through Zoom emergency remote learning during the pandemic, and now more recently AI. So now we're finally getting to that part where people coming in to college will no longer have been through the pandemic for all practical, I mean, at high school.
Yeah.
But that AI thing is new, and both these two have forced us to look at learning in in-person classes like we've never looked at it before. Okay, let's be frank here. Let's be direct. So much of what we do in higher education has not changed forever, right?
So true.
I mean, right? John has alluded to my sequel to Study Like a Champ, which is Teach Like a Champ, where I'm asking that question. How do you make the decisions of what to do in the classroom? How do you design your courses? But I don't think we've thought about that enough. And after the pandemic, with AI, this is what we really need to be focusing on or at least what I'm really focusing on.
Yeah. I would say 100% applause for that, Regan, because, after doing research on how to study best, how to learn effectively.
Yeah.
It's demoralizing to know that all of that research one is doing to hand it over to folks who aren't interested in using it because of lack of motivation and so forth. So the nexus between social psychology and cognitive psychology, where building a better student is way more than just telling them how to study, but it's understanding how to help a student properly engage and be motivated to want to study in the right context. That's absolutely essential. And a quick little note about our university system. These systems are not set up well. The model that colleges are based on is antiquated, but I think it's also, as we know, and this is a little dirty secret, big money makers. So a college has a tradition, and the tradition is making money, and it's done this thing well for 100 plus years, but maybe it's time for a change to help students out, right? To really
so true,
target their learning in ways that aren't just committed to one semester at a time. It should be over to, right? You have got 4 years. You could do a lot of 4 years if you use it properly.
Most
6 years.
And it's definitely going to take more collaborations. I mean, John mentioned social psych and cognitive psych, and those are the two areas John and I were in. And Andre, I don't think you know this, but John and I were both at the University of Washington in Seattle around the same time.
Really?
Yeah, and yep. And that's honestly when I reached out and when we got together on this book, it really went back 30 years to when we were both in the same corridor, running past each other, and John doing his cognitive stuff and me doing my social stuff. But that's the kind of collaborations it needs, is to get out of the silo, to get out of one track and say, what do we know in these other areas? Because motivation, I mean, that's it. And that's why I'm turning to effort, because I'm thinking that's what I'm seeing as an active teacher. I am seeing changes in effort, changes in motivation, and I need to better understand what I can do to do about it.
And guys, this is so important because when I was talking to Tracy Tokuhama Spinoza and Jared Cooney Horvath, we talked about science of learning, mind-brain education, and that's I would call it a transdisciplinary area that looks at contributions coming from all over the place, neuroscience, cognitive, social psychology. You were talking about belonging. I remember reading Ryan and DC's paper about self-determination theory, right? So autonomy, belonging, competence. And I feel like a lot of people just want to look at the neuroscience because it's sexier, like Paul Howard Jones calls it, But psychology has a lot to contribute as well, right? So it has to be kind of a joint effort, right? All different areas communicating so we can better understand how to teach and learn more effectively, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. And let me last questions now, guys. It's been a pleasure so far, but why the heck did you get into science in the first place? Are you guys major nerds and geeks, or well, because I feel like I am. I have a bunch of sci-fi books here. I'm looking at them right now. Was that the case for you guys, or was it something else?
So I would say a resounding yes to the major nerd and geek question. That's
okay.
But here's what, to be even more real though. When I was an undergrad, and I'm very upfront with my students about this, the only thing I knew was I wanted to learn more about why we do the things that we do.
Yeah.
Okay. And I knew that I wanted to do it. I wanted to study the influence of the situation, and I knew that I wanted to understand how our personalities did it. That's all I knew. And the only answer of how to know more of that was a social personality program at the University of Washington. And I didn't know what my job was going to be. I didn't know what I would do with it in my life. All I cared about was I want to know more answers.
Right.
Well, it worked out apparently, right? We're glad you took that path, Yeah.
And Regan definitely had more direction than I did, because going into college, I just wanted to stay afloat, quite frankly. And I knew I didn't want to be an engineer because I didn't want to deal with numbers at all, or math of any sort. And then I just found myself in a great lab with a wonderful mentor in Harry Barrick. And that kind of just pushed me in a direction. It was kind of by luck, so to speak. And, after college at that time, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So you find yourself in graduate school, and eventually a good work ethic turns into interest, which turns into passion. And, slowly but surely, I found my way. But by no means, for anyone out there listening to this who think they may want to be a scientist, learning is difficult. Yeah. This is not an easy path. And as much as all of my colleagues would say this, wow, what a great job. It's a lot of fun. A lot of it's not fun. It's tough.
Especially statistics, right? That's the tough part.
Well, I love math. I love math now, by the way. Love numbers.
Okay. Yeah.
But, science is all about delayed gratification and finding that element in fun for any work that needs to be done. So that's from a fantasy a fantasy movie called Mary Poppins, and that's what inspired me throughout my entire life. So,
I knew it. Yeah, I was trying to remember which movie. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But and I think if I could just riff on our title a little bit, because there's something really important here too. Like John said, for both of us, what's so important for both of us is finding people who would be our champions. So yes, students need to study like champs and teachers can teach like champs, but you've also got to find your champion, somebody who would support you and nurture you and be there for you to help you find what you want to do. And I think, especially I know both of us, all of us here sound like we're really passionate teachers. That's so important, is listen to students, especially in an age where you can log in for a free AI companion.
Yeah.
Right. And people are talking to AI more and more. Let's not forget the importance of being human. Be there for your students, for each other.
Amazing, guys. Well, we could end here, but I really want you to tell folks where to find you, where to find your work, your upcoming book. So Teach Like a Champ, right? Is it published? Not yet.
It's in production. So it'll be out in January.
Awesome. And I really want to get a copy, so I will order that, okay? Pre-order. So awesome. What else? Where else can people find you guys? I think probably just
for me, it's
book. Right?
Study Like a Champ is a great way to go, I think.
Yeah.
Really gives a good overview of the stuff that we're interested in and going for. And we just love it. I mean, I hate to pat us on the back, but working with APA and their editors, it's a really accessible volume. I love it. So that's where you can find us.
And something useful that, there is a free companion website where, and I think this part is important, even if you don't buy the book, although we'd love you if you did, but in every chapter of the book, we have a self-assessments, because maybe students don't know if they're studying the right way. Maybe they don't know if they're procrastinators or they're good note takers or what their, motivation levels are. And so I built a website completely free that not only has every survey that we used in the book all set up for people to take. And if you're a teacher, no work for you. You just send your student to that link. And Andre, maybe you can put the link in your
Definitely.
podcast.
Yeah.
But a teacher can just send their students to that link. No work for the teacher. The students do the self-evaluation, and it's programmed in Qualtrics to give them their answers, where to go for resources, and so on. There's artwork that explains in simple graphic form retrieval practice, interleaving, spacing. So even if you go, many teachers have said to us, my students aren't going to read a whole chapter. Well, they may read a whole chapter if you tease them and get your foot in the door. And that website has simple graphics. And then my favorite part, fighting fire with fire, there are TikToks. There are TikToks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are.
You're speaking their language. Yeah, awesome.
And to be fair, it's not two old guys. It's not us. I actually hired a social influencer who took my science of learning class, and she, of her own accord, made TikToks on this is what retrieval practice is. This is what interleaving is, and so.
Awesome.
Because she had done that of her own accord, I got a grant, scripted it, she reshot them, and all of those TikToks are available for free on the website. So
yeah, so that's refreshing. So you're the only guys telling young people to actually use TikTok, and not stay away from social media. So you can use it to your own benefit, right?
I would much rather they were scrolling our TikTok than the stuff that they're scrolling.
That's so true. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I mean, such an honor talking to you. And I know that folks watching this or listening to the podcast will benefit from this chat. And I hope they can read your book, Study Like a Champ, and hopefully buy Teach Like a Champ in the near future. Right, Regan? Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.